Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Couch Stories. I'm Jo Ann Firestone.
And I'm John Pinel. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming and to support our storytellers, the very talented, very small Couch Stories team. It's creating unique stories in Nelson, or unique spaces in Nelson for our stories. We believe we're all hardwired to listen to stories, also to tell stories. In the old days, stories were a way to pass on knowledge and history. They were also a way to entertain. So a key feature of storytelling is the way stories bring people together, just like this, and the way stories create community.
Now, the origin story for Couch Stories begins with the moth. It was the inspiration for our show. The moth begins in the state of Georgia in 1997, people getting together to tell true, personal stories without pictures or notes. It soon moved to Manhattan and grew to develop a series of storytelling events around the world. As well as producing an Emmy award-winning radio hour, Couch Stories is our homespun version of the moth.
So tonight we bring you stories inspired by the theme, time. Those moments in time that we've all had when things are not going expected or when the timing is absolutely perfect. This being our 20th show tonight, we wanted to come up with a few features that highlighted in some way the past 19 Couch Stories.
Our first idea was to make sure we had a majority of storytellers tonight who'd never been on Couch Stories stage. 80% of our storytellers are newbies, and some of them have never been to the show before. I know, explanations are needed. That really matches our first story, our first Couch Story storytellers.
Another recent feature, post-COVID, is the green light people now have to cancel stuff if they don't feel well, which is basically a good thing, but it's quite a noticeable new kind of cultural characteristic. So post-COVID, we had a few last-minute cancellations, and we solved it by asking the audience the night of the show if anyone would like to come up and tell a story. We did not think it would work. Well, it did. This evening, one of our storytellers for tonight got up on stage in 2022 and told a what now story. Another Couch Stories feature is that we've discovered some really good local storytellers, and we love bringing them back. We call them alumni storytellers. The audience does too. So one of our favorite is back tonight.
Final feature of tonight's show. In the past, we've had several shows that were designed to be fundraising events. The first show, Parents and Parenting, raised over $1,000 for Fresh FM. Tales of the Pandemic raised money for Save the Mai Tai. And The Theory of Everything raised money for Nelson Science Society. That's quite hard to say, that one. Tonight, we're raising funds again for a good cause, the MBS Nelson Marlborough Helicopter Rescue Service. We'll connect the dots for you too, but it's time to get started with time. As always, Jo and I will warm things up and kind of set the scene. We both have a time story to tell. Jo goes first. I'll tell my story at the beginning of the second half of the show. Jo Firestone.
Okay, I'm just going to put some of my props down.
Yeah, I'll take it for you.
Thank you. Okay. Because we're acknowledging tonight our 20th show, I thought it might be absolutely perfect timing to tell you the story of my memory of the very first show, because I was there. It was 2012 at the Suter Theater, and it all started, we think, back in 2010 when a woman named Ro Cambridge walked into Fresh FM. I was the program director of Fresh FM at the time, and Ro walked in with a woman who did a live, regular sort of interview program, and I was the sound engineer for that show. So the three of us were in the studio together. And I realized, that Ro was new in town. I certainly remembered what it was like when I first came to Nelson. It was kind of hard to meet people at first. So it wasn't long before we had our first cup of coffee, which is probably, we're close to 8,000 cups of coffee by now. So in the very beginning of us getting to know each other, we discovered that we both really enjoyed listening to spoken word podcasts. There was one podcast in particular that we really enjoyed listening to, and that was The Moth. So eventually, we started playing around with the idea, maybe we could produce a show like The Moth in Nelson. Maybe it would work. So I had a good friend at the time who came up with the name Couch Stories, which we really liked. The general manager of Fresh FM at the time was a really good graphic designer. We gave him some specs on sort of the cartoon type couch that we wanted, and he created that. We're still using that today. We came up with the theme Parents and Parenting, which we thought was like really broad. And then it was time to start inviting people. So I have a prop, which is actually not allowed. But I was worried that I would forget somebody, and I didn't want to do that. So this is the list of the very first people who did the very first couch stories in Nelson. Matt Laurie, Ali Boswick, Simon Thomas, Kath B., Flower Bradley, no glasses, Philip Chapman, who is actually here in the audience, Liz Waddell, Sean Barker, Mark Raffles, Billy Leonard, Michael Bortnick, and me. We had 11 storytellers. I was the 12th. Ro, it was so incredible. Like, Ro hosted the show on her own. Like, we talked about co-hosting. The idea for me at the time was absolutely terrifying. I know, I've come a long way since then, but I could not imagine myself spending that much time on the stage. So she not only hosted the show herself, she also told a story. The day of the show arrives. The lobby back in 2012 for the Suter Gallery was very tiny compared to what it is today. The show was sold out, and the lobby got packed with people. And I was the furthest away from the only door to get out. There were three things that started to happen to me, that is panic. All right? Probably, maybe the first one, I was a smoker at the time. I think that I was probably having a nicotine fit. The second one is that I do experience, panic around claustrophobia, and the idea of trying to get to that door, going through all of these bodies, there's no way. There is absolutely no way. The third thing is really amazing and so vivid, like a snapshot in my mind. I felt all of this anticipation in the room. All of these people who were there, they were so excited about being the people who were there for this new thing that was happening in Nelson that they knew about, and really excited. And I started to think that I was 50% responsible for what was going to be happening in the next hour. And it could be fabulous, like what I was feeling from the people in the room. And it could also be absolutely hideous. And it was at that point, probably, that I was wondering if in one of the desks in the lobby, if I might be able to find a paper bag just the right size to breathe in. And I knew that would just draw too much attention to myself. So I did the next best thing, which was to go into the restroom, which was close and it was empty, which was I was so grateful. Went into a stall, locked it, put the seat down, I sat there and I calmed myself down. Looked at the time, it was about somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes before the show was going to start. So I felt a whole lot better, I was ready. I went back into the lobby, there was hardly anybody there. They'd opened the doors to the theater. Ro was there, deeply relieved. This look of relief on her face when she saw me. I'm sure she thought that I had, I'd just taken off. We high-fived. We said, break a leg. She went in one door, I went in the other. Just over an hour later, it was fabulous. Everybody, all these storytellers who had no idea, they had a concept, they had a theory, they all just totally delivered. The audience loved it. 2 months later, we were invited by the Nelson Arts Festival team at the time to put a show together for the October Arts Festival, which we did. So here we are. I know, that was the beginning. Here we are now, show number 20, and I have to tell you, this is my 20th story. And I think that is absolutely incredible. I get a t-shirt at least. At least. There could be 20 more. We don't know. I think if there's 20 more, I may end up being, the Mick Jagger of storytelling in Nelson. Thank you.
Does that make me Keith Richards? Because I haven't had enough to drink. For our storytellers, here's how tonight works. The storytellers have 5 minutes to tell their story, and then they'll hear this sound. Then they get 1 more minute. 60 seconds later, they'll hear another sound, a bit more insistent this time. And that's the hook to wrap it up. Okay? At halftime, we'll have a break for 20 minutes.
Great. Okay, so we're ready to introduce our first storyteller. Don Johnson is going to be the very first one off the couch. And if Don were to die and come back as a person or a thing, he'd want to come back as a singer in a rock band. His favorite journey is driving to Christchurch through Lewis Pass. If Don could change one thing about himself, he would take 30 years off his age. And the phrase he uses most often is, I don't know. Currently employed by NELMAC in traffic management, please welcome Don Johnson.
I want to start by taking you back in time. Several decades to when I was in the timber industry and a young export marketing manager. And the story is about my first trip to Asia. Let me put a little bit of context for you first though. I grew up a very fussy eater. So the thought of going into Asia and all of that exotic food had me a little worried. The other context was that the last thing my manager said to me is that I want to give you 3 things to think about when you're over there. I want you to be a good ambassador for this company. I don't want you to embarrass you or us. And you're going into a different culture, so I want you to be respectful. So in that context, I headed off to Taiwan and briefly, and then into Japan. I went to Taiwan first because that's where our agent lived, and I met up with him. And he was able to give me the first of 3 very pleasant surprises while I was there. I happened to mention to him that I wanted to learn some language. So he smiled and he said, I know exactly where we're going. We went to bingo in Mandarin. That is full immersion. What I can tell you is I didn't fill a card all night. I learned a hell of a lot of numbers. Next stop was Tokyo, and we were doing business with a family company. And we got there on a Saturday, and Sunday was a free day. So Paul, our agent, said, I want you to come with me and we're going to learn about Japanese culture and families. What I didn't know at that stage is he was preparing me for the third surprise. So we spent the day on Sunday at Tokyo Disneyland. Didn't go on any rides. My job was to watch families, to watch how they interacted with each other and how they got on together. The third surprise really blew me away because in amongst all the business, what he'd arranged is for me to be a guest of honour and stay at the house of one of the executives of the company that we were dealing with. Unheard of in those days. So here I am in this house, and they've put me up in what's called the tatami room. It's a very formal Zen-like lounge with a grass mat, tatami mat. And we're sitting at the dinner table, and I needed to go to the toilet. I had to pee. So I gently asked where the bathroom was, and I got directions in there, and in this little utilitarian room, I went in there and I couldn't believe what I saw. The closest thing that I can describe was in the electronic throne. There's this giant toilet with armrests on either side, filled with buttons. So I went to the toilet, and then I got up and I turned around and I thought, how do I flush this thing? I had no idea. This is the day before emojis, so there were no diagrams. This was just all Japanese writing and coloured buttons. So in the end, I took a deep breath and I pushed the button. And out from under the back rim of the toilet extended this metal tube. That's not the flush button. So, okay, I've got to get it to go away. So I pushed the button next to it and went, oh no, there's water everywhere. And I this is where my anxiety started to kick in. It had nothing to do with food. So the first thing I did is put my hand over it. And in my panic I looked, and there was another a washcloth there, so I grabbed the cloth and I put the cloth over it. Now I've got the water contained, but now I have to turn it off, so I push another button, and luckily the water stopped. I thought, phew, that's a start. So I pushed the other button that I pushed first, and the rod retracted. So I thought, phew, we're not there yet though. I still have to flush this thing. So in amongst all this, in the back of my mind is my manager's words. I can't go and ask for help because that would be embarrassing. I can't just leave it because that's disrespectful. So I have to find a way to fix this. So as I'm wiping the toilet down and trying to clean all the water up, I happen to glance up at the rest of the toilet, and there, on the side of the cistern, there's a flush handle. Flush. Job done. With a lot of relief and a sheepish look on my face, I rejoined the family. We had a fantastic evening. I learned so much on that trip, but more than anything else, I learned that no matter where I go in the world, when it comes to toilets, the flush handle is always the flush handle. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Don. Our next storyteller is Debby Murphy. Debbie's greatest love in her life is every Labrador she has ever owned. Her heroes in real life are Paralympians. Debbie's greatest achievement is climbing the equivalent of the height of Mount Everest during lockdown. And she values both humour and staying power in her friends. A recently retired osteopath, currently volunteering for Nelson SPCA and responsible for picking up the doggy do, please welcome Debby Murphy.
My story this evening is about flying. And I'm going to start by going back to the very first flight I ever took. I was 9, and I was flying from Liverpool to Amsterdam with my nan. And it's quite a short flight, it's about an hour over the English Channel. But it was the most thrilling thing I'd ever done. The thrust of the engines, the speed of the takeoff, bouncing around the clouds. It was wonderful, better than any roller coaster ride. And since then, I've flown hundreds of times. But over the years, that initial excitement of being high above the clouds changed, and it changed to anxiety. And as I grew older, it changed to fear. And a particularly harrowing flight from Wellington, and we've all had one, in which I thought that plane was going to fall out of the sky, brought on my first ever panic attack. Now, being afraid of flying doesn't mean you don't stop flying. You have to carry on. You can't live in New Zealand and not fly. But it did fill me with dread every time I got on a plane, particularly with takeoff and landing and the bit in between. I'd be filled with dread, and my heart would pump, my hands would sweat, my stomach would churn. It would just like public speaking. So, when my friend Alistair rang me to tell me that he was going to be doing a tandem skydive the following weekend, Easter Sunday, and that he had a spare ticket, would I like it? I said, no thank you, with a few expletives. Now, Alistair, he's very fit, he's active, he skis, he surfs, he's a big action man, but he's also very persuasive. We would fly to 12,000 feet, free fall for 60 seconds, and then pull the chute. Absolutely nothing to worry about, Debbie said. You'll be attached to an instructor who would literally be pulling the strings. And then he added, hey, don't we always hear about centenarians jumping out of planes and them loving it? And so I decided it was time to pull on my big girl pants, face my fears, and the following weekend drove over to an airfield in West Auckland, together with Alistair and my partner Tonya, who we'd cajoled into doing the jump with us because she didn't want to miss out on all that fun. And when we arrived, we were shown an instruction video and given our suits. And while we waited for our instructors, Alistair and Tonya paced up and down, but I was actually in a good place. I'd found a lovely little picnic table, and I got the paper out and the thermos of coffee, and I got our morning tea of hot cross buns, and I got stuck into those. And then our instructors arrived. And Alistair's was tiny and came up to his nipples. Tonya's was Romanian with very limited English, and she's hard of hearing. And mine was a chubby Brit called Dave who was finishing off a pie. They took us over to the plane, and when we got on board, there was nothing inside except for 2 rows of bench seats. Alistair got in first, then me, and then Tonya. And it quickly dawned on Tonya that last in meant first out, and she didn't look very happy. And we took off, and I felt Dave attaching me to him. And I started getting a little bit anxious, and I thought, I'll just turn around and get some moral support from Alistair and give the 2 thumbs up. And as I turned round, Alistair had his eyes closed, and was hyperventilating. Oh no, I thought, what on earth am I doing? Why did I say yes to this? And then I remembered the instruction video hadn't mentioned anything about what to do in an emergency. What if Dave got sick? Surely, with all those pies, he had high cholesterol. What would I pull? Where was the chute? And I felt the panic rise in my chest, and to calm myself, I started to ask him as many questions I could think of. What are parachutes made of? How many jumps have you made? And what are all those fancy dials on your watch? And as he explained, I looked over at Tonya, who was now mouthing, "What is he saying?" because she thought I was getting extra instruction and she wasn't. At 12,000 feet, the door opened, and she was bum-shuffled along the bench towards the exit. And the sheer terror on her face is something I'll never forget, as they fell out the door. Then it was my turn to be bum-shuffled along. And as I sat with my legs dangling over the side of the plane into nothingness, I decided, keep your eyes closed and don't open them till your feet touch the ground. And then I felt Dave push me, and we were falling. And then he started hitting me on the back. Instead of being in a free fall position, I was now in a fetal position, yelling ironically, "Get me down, get me down." And as we landed, the three of us landed almost simultaneously, but just before I did, as I was hurtling down towards the ground with a very large Englishman strapped to my back, I prayed like I'd never prayed before. "Dear God, please do not let my last meal on earth be a hot cross bun." We group hugged and started crying hysterically, the three of us, much to the confusion, alarm and panic of the next group who were ready to go on the plane. And for the next couple of nights, I kept falling out of bed. It had done nothing to cure my fear of flying. It made it worse. It made Alistair's worse. It made Tonya's worse, and a whole group of tourists worse. So Tonya had a great idea. She knew how she was going to fix this. She bought me 6 flying lessons. Because she thought, because I'm such a control freak, the only way to cure me is to let me fly the ruddy plane myself. And it worked.
So I just want to say, Debbie, where am I? Oh dear. Yeah, Debbie came to us. She was in the audience last year, and she emailed us through our website. So, fabulous, thank you. It was such a good story. Can't imagine jumping out of a plane. Cannot. Okay, next off the couch is Stephen McLuckie. So Stephen has a few favorite occupations. They are exploring the wilderness, raising seedlings, and being immersed in a good read. He has a few extravagances as well. Overloading at the book fair, Stefano's Pizza, and the hoppiest IPA at the Free House. Stephen only lies when he's telling his dog he's a good boy. I love that. So please welcome the community coordinator at Victory Community Center, Stephen McLuckie.
Kia ora koutou. Come and do a couch story, she says. It'll be fun, she says. Look at you all, there's hundreds of you. So, kia ora koutou, my name is Stephen McLuckie, and my story is about the time I was an international football coach. So, in 2008, I took a team of homeless people to participate in the 2008 Homeless World Cup. What is the Homeless World Cup, I hear you ask? So, the Homeless World Cup is an international street soccer competition, annual event that's been going since 2003. which brings together teams of people from around the world who have experienced homelessness to play football together, to be together, to connect. And it uses the power of football to highlight the issue and injustice of homelessness around the world, but also act as a catalyst for positive change in the lives of those people who are participating. So I was involved in the UK before I arrived in Aotearoa. I was involved in a street paper in the UK called The Big Issue in Liverpool. So we've got a few Scousers up here this evening. I connected with Manchester United Football Club, which was challenging for a Scouser, but we worked together to take teams to participate in a number of competitions in Cape Town, in Copenhagen and in Edinburgh. And I came here in 2007, 2008, pumped by the potential of this and knowing that the competition that year was happening in Melbourne, so not too far away. So I was applying for jobs, and one of the jobs I was applying for was at an organisation called LifeWise, and it's a support service for homeless people in Auckland. They interviewed me. I mentioned about the Homeless World Cup. A couple of the panel looked at me with a degree of incredulity, but the third panel member, and thankfully the person who went on to offer me the job, had heard of this and had also heard of another couple of people in Wellington, an amazing pair of friends now, Tom and Katie Owen, who had expressed interest in this initiative as well. So I got the job, connected with Tom and Katie, and began the adventure of making this trip to Melbourne happen. So we began training, or connected with an amazing guy called Steve Fletcher, who was a referee, but also a great football enthusiast. And we began football training in Victoria Park in Auckland. Sure enough, first training session, no one turned up. But then we learned to incentivize and to make it a bit more fun. So we had some kai, we made it about friendship, fitness, and just having a bit of a laugh. We connected with the Salvation Army in Epsom Lodge, and soon we had dozens of people coming down and playing football every Monday afternoon. I've got to say though, there was a big instinct to pick up the ball here rather than kick it and throw it, but we made time for some touch as well. But yeah, we were playing week in, week out, and some of the guys who were getting involved were really getting a lot out of this initiative. Some of the guys from Epsom Lodge had spent the whole time there just in their rooms, not connecting with people, but this gave a real opportunity to get out, connect, make friends, and it was a real sense of kind of purpose and power. We made it to Melbourne and played 12 games across 8 days in December 2008. We lost 10 games, but we won against Sweden. We won against Cambodia, but really the competition was secondary to the power of participation itself, and the guys made a lot of friends, made a lot of connections with people all around the world. Thing I'm most proud of that time and getting these guys across to participate is there were 52 countries from around the world participating in the tournament in Melbourne, and 8 newcomer teams, and the team from Aotearoa, because of the way that they conducted themselves and the ambassadors that they were, the fact that they launched a haka every time an opportunity came along as well, meant that they were awarded the best newcomers trophy at the tournament as well. It was a time I look back with a lot of pride. It really shows the kind of power of sport and the power of community and connection really kind of transform lives. Many of the guys who were involved, it's not a magic wand, but it's many of those guys who came back felt a huge sense of kind of agency and a renewed sense of confidence. One of them went on to finish his degree. One of them went on to find his own accommodation, and many of them went on to kind of renew their connections with Whānau after a lot of time kind of alienated and ostracised. So yeah, power of sport to transform lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. 2 more storytellers to go in the first half. Next off the cows is Jeannie Robertson. The talent Jeannie would most like to have is to speak another language fluently. Her idea of happiness is contentment, laughter, and love. And if Jeannie were to die and come back as a person or a thing, she told us she'd be happy being a woman, but she thinks it would be more interesting to be a man. Is that a person or a thing? There's a clue here. Currently holding down a few different jobs, one of which is the founder of Life Drawing Nelson. Please welcome Jeannie Robertson.
Kia ora, my name is Jeannie. I was born in 1979 in Abbotsford, Dunedin. My mother was an artist, and my father at a time was an art collector. I grew up in a very artistic, creative surroundings that feels like home to me. As a preschooler, I went to exhibition openings. I remember being this high, running around the gallery, seeing people socialising and drinking wine and looking at all the big, beautiful pictures on the walls. And then when I was at primary school, we moved to Riwaka, or Riwaka as some people say, and my parents they bought a house. I was allowed to draw on the walls, so no need for paper. That's where I found my creative freedom, drawing on the walls and doors with no boundaries. It was wonderful. I went to Motueka High School for a short period of time. My favourite subject was art, of course. I remember one time I found a picture in National Geographic magazine of a topless woman that I took to class and I drew. My high school art teacher said that her boobs were too saggy. I thought they looked beautiful. I've always had a fascination for the human body. When I was 14 years old, my family moved to Wellington and I started at Onslow College. Again, I loved art. My teachers loved smoking weed. I also took Māori art history and classical studies. Again, a fascination of the human body with the classics. That led me to go on a student exchange at the young age of 15. I jumped on a plane over to Anita, Iowa, in America, and studied art over there at high school. They have photography, pottery, mixed media, and a huge art budget, so as many materials as I dreamed of. I got to draw on the walls over there as well. They asked me to do some murals at the school, so I did a mural of Whiriwaka Wharf and also a big painting of their mascot, a cougar. And while I was there, I won many art awards. The most prestigious was presented by Hillary Clinton in Washington, D.C., a photograph of a sofa. It was a grey sofa. The light was shining in through the window. They liked it. I was happy. I came back to New Zealand. I graduated high school like 2 years early, so I was super young too young to go to university, so I got pregnant. I moved down to Dunedin and attended my auntie's life drawing class just to hang out because, I just liked that environment. The model didn't turn up that night, so my auntie asked if I would model, which was my first experience of life modelling. I had my clothes on and I had my baby in my arms, but it was just such a warm, inviting environment, and everyone was just so kind and lovely, and I think that feeling really stuck with me through the years. I moved to Wellington shortly after that and decided to pursue a career in photography, getting 2 contracts under my belt and doing freelancing. Picked up my babies and I travelled around New Zealand training up other photographers and taking lots and lots of portraits. I plonked my daughter at the door and she welcomed the visitors, the people that I was taking photos of, and my son was behind me doing arm farts for the for the little kids to keep them entertained and keep him entertained. It was a wonderful decade of my life. And then I came down to Nelson. I did quite a bit of modelling here and there and landed an amazing contract with a very prestigious photographer who was based in Nelson. And we worked together on a project for almost a couple of years, travelling around New Zealand. And then I formed Life Drawing Nelson. It's great. I get to hang out with other artists and creatives. I get to hire models and train them up. I get to model when the models don't show. I had a woman once, she got concussion just before class, so I had people coming from as far as Onikaka. I couldn't cancel the class, it was fully booked, so there was only one option, so I one-man banded it. You got to do what you got to do. So that's my creative journey, and who knows what will come next, but I love this space, and it's been wonderful being up here chatting to you all. So thank you so much.
So I've known Jeannie 6 years, I think. I met you, in 2018. I've always been wanting to go to her art classes, haven't done it yet. But I still might. Just before the break, Allan Innes-Walker is next off the couch. So the historical figure Allan most identifies with is Bob Dylan. The only time he feels the need to lie is when he's playing golf. Allan's greatest regret is not giving his mum and dad the unreserved love that they both deserved when they were alive. And his heroes in real life are emergency services personnel. And I quote, "Every single bugger who works in a hospital from the early morning orderly to the district nurses." The company director and creative director of Hot House, the Nelson Agency for Web Design, Graphic Design, and Branding, please welcome Allan Innes-Walker.
I've learned this year that I cry a lot, and I'm okay with that. It's a healing process. And I love my mum and dad. I'm sorry, Zin. Zin's heard this story a bit, and she's bored with it now. In Easter this year, I burst into flame. And thank you for being here and listening, because it's part of my healing process. We're on Arapawa Island, which is in the Marlborough Sounds, which is the arse end of nowhere, in the north end of the Marlborough Sounds. We were having a barbecue, and I was cleaning some mussels with a little girl called Esme, who was the most beautiful person you've ever met. And out of nowhere, one of my companions said, "Can you help me just do this?" And as a helpful person I am, I just wandered over, and it was a smoker, a little silver box on the ground. Beneath the smoker, there was a small bowl, an innocuous little bowl, a dog bowl. A dog would drink water from, and my companion was filling the bowl to get the smoker working. Unfortunately, the methylated spirits hit the bowl, and what looked like an innocuous little bowl, obviously it was still very hot, and we both of us, I'm not a stupid guy, I'm very cautious. It was just something that happened. The methylated spirits spontaneously combusted on me, and I was all of a sudden, hey, I'm on fire. It's quite a moment. I'm reminded now that, of course, the theme this evening is about time, so at that moment, time stopped. Has anyone been on fire before? I went to pat my arm, and that didn't do much good. And it felt like in that moment time stopped, and I was falling into a vortex of mortal danger. I don't know if anybody's experienced that. It's quite unusual. And then time started again, and the lizard brain took over, and I fell to the ground and started to do what you're supposed to do. I wasn't in control, and that's when I stepped out of time. I was out of time. I could hear people saying, "Is he on fire?" Because methylated spirits doesn't burn to see, it's invisible. And there I was writhing on the ground trying to put this feeling out. Unfortunately, the ground was a bit stony, so it wasn't doing much good. And then I felt that's quite an intense pain on my inner thigh. And as a man, that motivated me to stand up and take my pants off. And I think as I took my denim pants off, that put the fire out off my legs. Then I felt my tummy burning. And so I took my t-shirt off. And I think that put the fire out of my arms. And then it was over. It must have been maybe a minute. It's hard to tell. Time's funny like that. And then I was standing there, and I looked down and I could see my skin hanging off my arms. Sorry, this sounds very dramatic. I could see my arms, and I knew that this was different. So I ran for the shower in the batch. Unfortunately, as anybody who lives in New Zealand knows, that occasionally batches don't work, and so there was no water coming out of the fucking shower. And my companion, we looked at each other, we said, "We better run for the beach." And he said, "Should we run for the beach?" "We'll run for the beach, let's run for the beach." And so I ran to the beach, down 300 metres of paddock, and my feet were burned on top, but mostly that was okay down below, it wasn't a problem. My dog, Alfie, he knew something was desperately wrong. And he followed me to the beach. He was so concerned. And I got to the beach and I fell into the water. And that was good. That was very good. There's only my partner who's sitting down here, who has been beside me every second of the way. She knew what to do. I was in the water for 10 minutes and it was comforting, and they brought down hats and a jacket because it was fucking cold, which was good. But she was worried I was going to have a heart attack because I'm 55 and it was quite intense, so she brought down the 4x4 and they stuck me on the back of the motorbike and took me back up to the house where they'd filled the bathtub with cold water, and they stuck me in the bathtub and continued to look after me. She said, of course, brilliantly, because she'd done a first aid course 2 weeks before, that keep the water running and keep the water cold. And so I was being looked after by my people. Someone out of the corner, I could hear someone say, "Yep, we called the Coast Guard. They're just deciding whether to bring the boat or to get the helicopter." And I do believe my response was, "Get the fucking helicopter!" And that's what I'd like to focus on now, is the emergency helicopter. I was sitting in that bath looking up the beautiful hill going, in about 20 minutes I'm going to come out of shock and I'm going to be in a world of hurt. The helicopter came over the hill. That beautiful, beautiful red thing came over the hill. It just so happened this middle of nowhere was in the direct flight path between Wellington and Nelson. It was coming back from dropping someone else off. It got the call a minute out and came and rescued me. We thought it flew over and hadn't got the call. It did a U-E and they landed. Matt, the paramedic, was there. He stabilised the situation. Zinni had wrapped me in fucking glad wrap. Thanks, honey. Because that's what you do. And Matt and the crew then looked after me. That's when they shot me full of ketamine and time ceased to exist. I don't know if any of you have had the misfortune to have to get shot up with ketamine. I do not recommend that. I then got in a helicopter and took an 8-minute ride to Wellington, where all I recall is saying, "Matt, I love you," about 1,000 times. And was completely disassociated. I might have well have not even existed, but here I am, 60 minutes from the burn to the hospital. I'm convinced that helicopter was... Look, I was going to live, but they saved me from a lifetime of deeply traumatic experience and pain that I didn't have to go through. We're going to go through and try and raise some money now for the Nelson helicopter. They are the most magnificent bunch of people, and I really recommend that if you can give some money to this cause, please do. I am completely in awe of those people. So thanks for listening to my story. Thanks for helping me process what I've been through. And thank you.
Keep going, I'm a bit emotional. Thank you, Allan. That was amazing. Now, we said we joined the dots together earlier when we talked about the charity, and now you can see what we're talking about. Okay. So tonight we're fundraising for the MBS Nelson Marlborough Rescue Helicopter. And during the break, you'll notice some real actual pilots, Zinnia and Woody. They're dressed for the occasion, and they'll be walking around with buckets, collection buckets. You can also donate by FPOST at the bar. And no, are you still planning to be on the steps as well? Yes, and all in favour of the MBS Nelson Rescue Helicopter. So please give generously.
So it's time for a break now. We're back in 20 minutes. The NCMA bar is open. Thank you in advance for giving generously. When we return, there's more time stories. I'll come over here. So welcome back to the second half of Couch Stories. And there are more time stories on the way. And there will be another opportunity after the show to make a donation to the MBS Nelson Marlborough Rescue Helicopter Service. I did hear that you all have been incredibly generous, so thank you very much. So it's time for John's story now, my co-host. So please welcome John Pinel.
Right. So in 1996, I was working, my first job as an English teacher was for the British Council in Alexandria in Egypt. And I'd been out of England for about 3 years by this point. I'd worked as a cow milker in the Golan Heights, in Israel, which got me enough money to qualify as an English teacher. But the problem with working as an English teacher, everybody's natural career pathway. But the problem with working at Alexandria, and I was hired locally, so I wasn't on a London contract, so I had to live on not much money. Now, it was fine. I could live quite comfortably in Egypt on my income, but I couldn't really save up to go back to England. And I've been away for 3 years. And I wanted to go and live in London where my sister lived, and she had a great group of friends, and I just wanted to go and live in London and party, really. And I didn't have enough money, and then, as luck would have it, the British Council in Saudi Arabia started looking for younger teachers. Would they like to go to Riyadh for 3 months and give it a try? You get about the equivalent of a 1.5 year salary in Egypt, tax-free, accommodation provided. So I was like, yum, yum, yes, please. So I said yes, I would do it. And I had no intention of staying, but I knew it would give me the money I needed to get out of Africa and get back to England. But after I finished my last teaching job in Alexandria and had quit my flat, the visa wasn't very quick in coming, and I was spending hours and hours and days at the Saudi embassy going, where's my visa, where's my visa? And my money was just dwindling. So what little savings I did have was disappearing. And then it turned out the problem was, if you have a passport full of Israeli stamps and you've crossed through Rafah a few times, there's just no way you can go to Saudi Arabia and turn up at the airport. So eventually, the British Embassy in Cairo agreed to give me a fresh passport, like a temporary one that I could use while I was in Saudi, and then I could change it back when I came back. Like being a spy or a low-level diplomat. And so I said, yeah, great, but it took ages and I had almost no money. And on the 7th of March, 1996, I flew to Riyadh from Cairo. I know this because it was my 25th birthday. And I know how poor I was because I didn't have enough money to even get on it the night before for my 25th. And I was flying to dry Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is just not for me. My students' idea of a night out was to go and see public executions on a Wednesday night. So time passed, and I managed to save up enough money to go back to England, like plenty of cash, you know. So let's fast forward 3 months, and I arrive back in Cairo, and I'm going to stay with friends in Cairo, and to go diving down in Sharm el-Sheikh, because that was my thing at the time, so all my spare money went on scuba diving. And so I did all that, hung out with friends in Cairo, and I was a harmonica player in a band in Alexandria, that in my spare time, and there was a bunch of teachers in Cairo that also had a band. So the night before I was going to fly back to England, I went to the travel agent and got my flight tickets. I changed most of my Egyptian money back into US dollars so I could leave the country, and we went to the gig. And I don't really remember the gig, but I remember getting back to my friend's apartment on the east side of the river, and we were getting out of the taxi. I was in the front seat, passenger seat, and I was paying the driver. And as I was getting out, I noticed that the amplifier, one of the band's amplifiers, wasn't really coming out of the boot of the taxi, right? So I put my bag on the front seat, went to help with the amp. So there I am with the amplifier, going up the steps. Come and get my bag. Yeah, no problem. So we're going up the steps, and I said, you get my bag? Yeah, this one. Yeah, no, that's not my bag. My bag's the stripy one with the drawstring top on it. And someone said, this bag, the bag on the back seat. No, that's not my bag. Can we put this fucking amp down? So I put the amp down, and I looked at them, I said, my bag, the stripy drag with the and I'm off up the road after the taxi. The bag is still on the front seat of the taxi. I guess the taxi was maybe 200 meters up the road when I started running. And I got up to the taxi, and then the traffic lights went green. Away it went again. This is a really long, straight road, like 3 lanes of traffic. So I keep running. And to be fair to me, 2 or 3 times I almost caught up with that taxi. And eventually, the taxi disappeared around a corner. So what was in the bag? In the bag was some cassettes that I'd made of the live recordings of our band in Alexandria, and I think we were called Bad Licorice. And I was going to make copies when I got back to England and send them back to members of the band. So that was a bit tragic. And then there was a Jim Donlap wah-wah pedal that I'd bought to make my harmonica player sound more groovy. My tickets for England the next day, they were there. And as was my passport. And roughly $10,000 in United States currency, which was why, I was going to go back to England. I was going to set myself up. It was gone. I got to get this taxi. So I started running again. Screw that. So I hammering up the road, sweat pouring off me. At some point, I lost one of my sandals. Got round the corner, there's the taxi. Actually, there's quite a lot of taxis, aren't there, here? I think we're outside the cinema or something. Everything was a taxi. Everything I looked at was a taxi. There was only one option. I had to chase all of the taxis. So I was running around, jumping over cars. How I didn't get run over to this day, I will never know. But I like to think that when that taxi driver got home and found my fucking bag with all my fucking money in it, I like to think it made a fucking difference to his fucking life. It's probably about 4 or 5 years' salary for a taxi driver. I hope he had fucking kids. And he put those fucking children to fucking college. And maybe one of them will cure fucking cancer one day. Although, I am the first to admit that it was a long time before I could think about him that charitably. It took me an hour and a half to walk back to the apartment with one shoe. And it was a further 3 months of time sleeping on the floor of that apartment to earn enough money to get a ticket back home via Czech Airways, which stopped, I think, in Frankfurt, Buda and Pest. Right. 3 months on my sister's sofa, where I outstayed my welcome because the flatmate was a drug dealer and that was kind of his sofa. And then another 2 months on a mattress in the attic of a squat in King's Cross. But when I eventually did find an apartment to rent, it did have my future wife in it. So. So I learnt 3 important stories that day. 1, never ask anyone to get a bag out of a taxi for you. 2, if you've got a bum bag, wear it. Don't put it in another bag. And 3, time is money, but it's only money. Thank you very much.
Such good bum bag advice, definitely. Thank you very much, John. So we begin the second half with a story from Glenn Bisdee. Glenn is one of our frequent flyer alumni storytellers. He's told 5 stories over the last 12 years. Tonight's number 6. Now he's been on stage at the Boathouse, the Granary, and NCMA. Glenn first appeared in June 2017 for the Couch Stories Story Slam. So Story Slam is when we didn't pre-invite any storytellers. Instead, we asked people in the audience to come up on stage and tell a story. And that night, the best storyteller got a $100 cash prize. Later that year, Glenn was invited to the October Couch Stories, and the theme was encounters. In this story, he took us back to Otaki Primary School, 1979, where he encountered a playground bully. 2 years later, June 2019, the theme was how we met. Glenn told us how he met his wife, Thalassa Kawachi, and Thalassa told us her side of the story as well. They were a little different. Story number 4, October 2019, the theme, After Hours. And Glenn opened his story describing how he's running down Courtney Place in a coconut bra and ripped leather pants at 1:30 in the morning, and then he gets arrested. And that was just the start of the story. His fifth story was in 2022. Theme was What Now? And that night Glenn described what happened after he turned down a very good job offer from Fonterra in favor of trying his luck in Hollywood. Glenn is the Port Nelson launch master on the Waimea 2 pilot boat, and soon he will be running Port Nelson's new boat, the Manuka. Please welcome Glenn Bisdee with story number 6 for Couch Stories.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, I didn't realise it was that long, but time flies when you're having fun. So there's a good story in a story, and the story wheel goes like this: kind of, you need to go, find, search, change, take, return. That's the story wheel. So I'm going to take you back to 1987. You probably maybe remember it, the share market crash. Anyone remember it? I was wiped out. I was 17 years old. It took New Zealand's economy a long time to recover from that episode. So in 1991, when I graduated from Massey University and was looking for a job in Wellington, nothing was available. I mean, I was trying to get my foot into the door in any form of business whatsoever. Probably didn't help the fact that my CV consisted of just a one-page photograph of myself and a phone number. I mean, nobody called. I don't know why. Anyway, I ended up being a fishmonger in Wellington, delivering fish all over Wellington. It was quite a miserable existence, but I saved up enough money, and I thought to myself, what do I really want to do? I actually wanted to go to Hollywood and be a famous movie star. I'd never been on a plane before, but I just thought Hollywood is where I need to get to, you know, the red carpet, lights, camera, action. So I jumped on a flight, one-way tickets to Los Angeles, sat in the back seat in the smoking section because it was $100 cheaper, and arrived May 10th, 1992. And I was actually expecting, literally, the carpet just to be rolled out. There was nothing. Nobody was there to meet me other than the National Guard, because it was the Rodney King riots. And so LAX was just surrounded by the National Guard, and I kind of made my way through. Being a budding actor, what do? You get yourself an agent. I got mine in the back page of the Los Angeles Times for $60. They didn't call. Slowly but surely my $2,000 kind of whistled away, and I found myself, maybe one of Stephen's friends, homeless outside the back of a tyre factory, living in a pallet fort. I mean, the red carpet that I found in the dumpster, I kind of lined out in my little pallet fort, and there I lived for 2 weeks. Got a job in that tyre factory for $6.40 an hour, and slowly crawled my way out of homelessness into a motel room. In a story one night in a pub from a guy who unfortunately was murdered outside that pub. He told me the story about fishing in Alaska, and I thought, this is me. I was pretty downtrodden, and you know, you've got to go for these opportunities when they present themselves. So I went to Alaska, into Dutch Harbour, and stayed up there for 1 year and fished in Russia and the Bering Sea for 1 year, and I just thought it was awesome because I had my home, I was being well fed, I was incredibly well paid, which was the best thing about the thing. I forgot about the acting thing by this stage, and I got washed up into Seattle 1 year later. I went straight to the Rolex watch shop and bought myself my first Rolex. And then, which right here, 30 years later. So I wrote to Rolex watches and I said, for those who appreciate the true value of time, Rolex. And Roland Putin, the president of Rolex watches at the time, wrote back to me and said, I really like that statement, it's copyright. I'm not going to pay you for it, but here's a signed copy of the Rolex Awards. Anyway, it was a pretty crazy time at sea all over the world. And, you know, lots of fishing, a lot of kind of lonely times, a lot of sad times, a lot of frightening times, scary times, and also some really crazy times. And I'm talking really crazy. We pulled this fishing boat, a Korean fishing boat, into Timaru one night, and the captain comes up to me and goes, Mr. Glenn, come close, Mr. Glenn. And I said, what is it, Mr. Pock? He goes, you
You go get used woman's underwear. You go.
I was like, okay. Pulls out $500 and gives it to me. And I'm kind of walking slowly towards Timaru Township from the port, thinking, how the hell am I going to get... maybe I could go to farmers and soil them up a little bit. And then I thought, maybe I started looking, over people's fences into their backyard to see if there was anything hanging on the laundry line. And then I thought maybe I could climb the stairs to the House of Disrepute and buy some. And then out of the blue came the Salvation Army. And I just walked straight in there and I said, hey, excuse me. She goes, oh, can I help you? And I said, yeah, maybe. And she said, well, how can I help you? And I said, have you guys got any woman's underwear? And she's like, you're in luck. It's fill a bag for $20. And I was like, point me the way. So she was like, they're out the back. So I went and grabbed a shopping bag and I just stuffed this so full of used women's underwear, went back to the boat. I gave it to Mr. Pock. I said, he goes, oh, very good, Mr. Glad, very good. I pocketed the 480 and, but I'll tell you why I can get away with that bit of a racist joke, because my wife's Asian. Met her at sea. She said, here, go for it. You're fine. But the thing about it was, an hour later, they'd had these used women's underwear covering the whole vessel, throwing rice everywhere, having the time of their life just before they went to sea as a good luck charm. The whiskey came out. There was a pig on the spit on the back of the boat. And we just had the hell of a time as we pulled out of Timaru. Anyway, thank you very much for having me. I hope you've enjoyed your time. I've enjoyed mine. See you later.
Thank you, Glenn. No letters, please. They were different times. Sorry. Up next tonight is Tony Tomorrow. If Tony were to die and come back as a person, he'd like to be Batman. The word and phrase he most uses is, I'm Batman. Tony is happiest just before the dawn, and the talent he'd most like to have is to be able to see in the dark, which would help with the whole fighting crime at night thing. His primary work is as Gotham's chief protector, and occasionally he finds a stray dog to take to the animal shelter. We also know him as a sound engineer at last year's Couch Stories. Please welcome off the couch, Tony Tomorrow.
I kind of just answered it as Batman, so all the answers kind of was like that as well. I got a little song. If you're lost, you can look, and you'll find me. Yeah. If you fall, I'll catch you. I'll be waiting. To be honest, I'm not supposed to take this microphone off, but I'm enjoying it anyway. If I was to do the whole thing like that, time would be really slow, right? This whole reciprocal nature of people up on stage is good. And time works in a very weird way like that. I've had an occasion where I have been in one sense of time while someone else has been in another sense of time. So I was on my way to work one day, I was crossing the road, it was a highway, had my hood on, acting all cool, not paying attention, and a car going 80 k's an hour hit me. And right when it hit me, I hit the windshield, or the windshield hit me. I was up in the air, and as it kind of happened, time kind of slowed down. And I kind of turned around, and I could see there was a car behind the car that just hit me. And you could see it was about to swerve and come back out. So I pictured myself having to kind of land in a way to be able to get up and move out of that way. So I slowly, I was moving very slow to me. And I hit the ground, got up, ran round the back of the car. Guy that hit me had a trailer. I jumped over the trailer, got to the door, and right when I got to the door, he opens the door. And so for me, it was very slow, but for him it was a split second. He thought he hit me, and I went over the top. He opened the door, and I was there. Time is a very weird thing. Is that our brain doing that, or is that time as an actual concept? I got asked to do this about time, and I started researching quote marks. I was looking at a lot of YouTube videos. Don't do it. You can go down some deep holes. There was this one I was watching, actually. I really wanted to have some factual evidence about time, like what is time, and I really wanted to come to play with it. But there was this one. It was like The Wired Presents. It had someone explaining the 5 levels of, time. It was primary school, secondary school, so on and so forth. I got confused on the primary school, so I decided not to try and relate that to you because, let's face it, if I can't grasp that concept, what are you guys going to be able to do with that? Something I did learn, though. Time travel. Who's interested in time travel? If you're interested in time travel, meet back here last Thursday. So, the speed of light is an actual thing. I didn't know this. So this has actually opened my eyes to a lot of things. I wasn't a very good academic person at school. I never really paid too much attention. I went to, eat my lunch and go play with my friends and things like that. And I've actually taken a real liking to this whole time concept, theory of relativity and the speed of light. If the speed of light had an internal clock, so the proton, I only learned about protons today. If it had an internal clock, it would not move. So when light leaves, it's frozen in time. So if you want to time travel, you need to go at the speed of light in one direction, and you'll see everything else move on while you are not moving, pretty much. It's funny how awkward silences make time go slower, right? I had a lot of ideas what to do for time, and to be honest, this is like a 6-minute talk. I think I spent about 7 hours running over certain things I wanted to talk about. When I first thought about it, I was like, I'm gonna do a song time after time, that'd be great. I actually stole that from Di Henwood. He did it in a comedy show in the 2000s. And I came up with ideas, and I just put my headphones in and my earpods in. I was doing some dishes and doing some housework, and I was coming up with all these ideas, what I wanted to talk to everyone here about with time. And I was like, that's probably about 20 minutes. I better compress it down. I have a look up, and it was 50 minutes. And I was like, okay, so I need to break it down into smaller pieces. So I broke it down into smaller pieces, but I got the problem about, I want to explain more. So when I broke it down into smaller pieces, those small 5-minute pieces turned into another 20-minute piece. And I have way too many things I wanted to talk about. But the main thing I wanted to do was that little song at the start, be nice and really uncomfortable. For the reason of everybody joining me now to do it properly. Is everyone keen? So you've got 3 words. Obviously 2 of those words are the same word. And it's what this is about. It's time. You just got to think about after. I will sing the first bit, and you guys sing time after time. We can have a practice first. Is that all right? Yeah? So I'll count to 3, and you sing time after time. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Time after time. Yeah, we'll try it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Time after time. I'm not done yet. Okay, really put your all into it. Let's really get involved, because I'm going to get involved. You ready? By the way, I'm doing the first bit. You guys just do the time after time bit. If you're lost, you can look and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you, I'll be waiting. Time after time. Time after time. Time after time. Time after time. That was my whole point. Thank you very much.
So original. And you know, like this is something over the years, over 20 shows that we have discovered about couch stories. It's so eclectic. You know, it's so subjective, you have no idea what you're gonna get. Yeah, anyway, thank you, Tony. Thank you. Okay, Jackie Clemmer is up next. And Jackie's favorite journey is sailing with friends and family. If she were to die and come back as a person or thing, it would be a bellbird. Jackie's idea of happiness is meeting family at the airport that she hasn't seen for ages, which I can totally relate to. And the talent she would most like to have is to be able to drive her boat in and out of the marina slip with confidence. An audiologist with her own business helping people improve their hearing. Please welcome Jackie Clemmer.
Koto koto, my name is Jackie and I sail. It all began about 20 years ago, not long after I met the love of my life, and he had seen a small sailboat in the marina, and well, he proposed that we buy it. We hadn't known each other long, but it was $1,000 and 22 feet long, and it had room for two of us to sleep up there since we were friendly. It had sails and an engine that he could get going. 18 years ago, we sold everything and we moved to New Zealand and continued to sail. We've raced, mostly we cruise, and we cruised with some very good friends who had this great adventure planned. They had a much larger boat than I'd ever really been in. It was an ocean-going yacht, and their plan was to take off for a few years and sail the Pacific. So in 2019, that's exactly what they did, and we got them all set up and we wished them well. They left Nelson and they headed through Cook Strait. We watched them when they left. All sailboats have a tracker on them, so you can follow them on the map to see exactly where they're at, see the weather conditions going. We watched them towards Tahiti and head north up towards French Polynesia. And the tracker on a sailboat, you can zoom in so you can see on satellite maps exactly where they are, and it just looked like paradise. They carried on north, they went to Hawaii, they carried on, they went all the way to the Aleutian Chain in Alaska, and then they were working their way down the west coast of North America, and COVID hit. And it took them 4 years before they could come back, for obvious reasons. Finally, the time came that it was safe for them to come back, and we watched them leave British Columbia. They headed out to sea, heading south. And we watched with great interest, which turned to some concern when there was quite a significant weather pattern that hit them off of Mexico. We were more concerned when we got message on the satellite phone that a major piece of their rigging had broken and they almost lost the mast. But they didn't, and they limped their way over to Hawaii for repairs. All in all, it took them 5 weeks to get from British Columbia to Hawaii, which should have taken 10 days. And they were quite tired. It was only the two of them. So Forrest decided that he wanted to see them home, and I said absolutely. So we devised a plan to meet them in Samoa, which had only recently opened up with COVID. And so I flew up for a week-long holiday. I wished them well. And then I watched as they took off towards Tonga. Tonga had opened up along the way. They were the first boat into the northern Vavau Island group. It looked absolutely incredible. All the while they were sending me pictures of, beautiful tanned crew. Forrest making pina coladas from scratch. It looked absolutely beautiful, and they were in Vavau for maybe 10 days to 2 weeks, waiting for the weather window to come safely home. That time came, and I got a message on, I think midday Thursday, that the weather looked good and they were on their way. And I watched as the tracker headed out to sea and towards home. And I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, and the tracker didn't move. And I'd been watching my friends for 4 years, and the tracker always moved, particularly when they were under sail. But I thought, no worry. Send them a message on the satellite phone. Tracker's not moving. You might want to reset that. Went to work, went about my business, checked again later that night. No message on the phone. Tracker still hadn't moved. But I reassured myself, it's only been a day, just go to sleep. I woke up the next day, which was a Saturday, and still the tracker hadn't moved. And I reassured myself throughout the day that they had all the proper safety equipment. They knew what they were doing. I looked at the forecast. I can read a forecast, and the weather was fine. But as the day progressed, and it was a very, very long day, by evening I was certain that they were all dead. It didn't help that when I lived in Whangarei, I had met someone who was doing a similar crossing, and she was on watch at night, and her husband and her 2 sons were below, and they hit a container that had fallen off a ship, and she was the only one that survived. And so, these things cross your mind. And I was sort of stuck in a position, there wasn't anything I could do but wait. However, I came to accept the fact that I was a widow by the evening, and I went through this. It's funny where your mind goes with these things. I considered what an appropriate mourning period would be, and I thought about, well, at some stage I'm going to have to date, and I don't know how to do that. Last time I dated was 20 years ago, and well, that guy there, friends went out for my birthday, actually, and he followed us out of the pub, and he said, you're smart and you're beautiful, and you should come home with me. So I did. That's what I knew, and then the thought of online dating simply terrified me. But I managed to get to sleep, and I woke up in the morning, and the tracker moved, and they had made significant progress. They were on their way. Everything was fine, and I didn't get a message till the afternoon. The message finally said, "Sorry, we haven't been checking the message. It was a terrible sea state. We've been horrendously sick." I was, of course, delighted. And they did, of course, make it home safe and sound, and which, of course, I'm grateful for that. And we continue to sail with a boat that's significantly larger than the 22-foot one we started with, and I am learning to sail it. And thank you for coming home and not dying.
Thank you, Jackie. Dating is a fate worse than death. I like that. It's good. Okay, our penultimate storyteller tonight is Sarah Thornton. If you were here for 2022's Tales of the Pandemic, we were one speaker short on the night. And you might remember Sarah coming up to the stage from her safe, comfortable seat in the audience to tell a couch story spontaneously on the spot. So this is the first time we get to introduce her properly. Sarah's favourite journey is up the wooden hill to Bedfordshire. And if she could change one thing about herself, it would be her impatience. And she'd like to come back as a peacock, just strutting around all day, showing off. A retired teacher, after 30 years, she now finds herself with the rather grand title of Learning and Innovation Specialist. Please welcome off the couch, Sarah Thornton.
Thank you, John. So my story involves killing time, which could have resulted in either doing time or spending time in a rather unusual location. So this all took place about 30 years ago with my future husband, who's sitting here in the audience. And at that time we were living in separate countries. So he was a Kiwi living in Scotland, I was a Pom living in Japan teaching English. And we hadn't been together for a while, so we decided to get back together, have a bit of a reunion, and have a bit of a cheap holiday at the same time. So Jim looked around for some cheap flights, and he found a flight to Morocco. So he bought the cheap tickets, which, as you probably know, cheap tickets generally involve some kind of inconvenience, whether it's some out-of-the-way airport or some godforsaken hour of the night when you have to board your plane. So anyway, I flew back to the UK and we got on our flight to Morocco, landed in Marrakesh, and quickly found cheap backpackers and decided we'd go off and explore the city like proper travellers that we were, not tourists, we were travellers back in them days. We found a local guy who was willing to show us around, show us the real Morocco. He took us around the hammams, the bathhouses, the souks, the markets, and he also supplied us with a little bit of hashish, which at that time was very widely available, but still not particularly well received by the local authorities, shall we say, and could have resulted in up to a 10-year prison sentence for recreational use. But we were blissfully unaware of all this, so we were, doing our thing, being travellers, kind of going up and down all these back streets and checking out all the local markets and, feeling really cool. And then the week quickly passed and it was time to leave Marrakesh. So we checked out of the backpackers ridiculously early, strapped on our backpacks and thought, right, how are we going to kill the next 12 hours until our flight actually leaves? So we just wandered around. And eventually we realised that what the locals do is they head to the beach. And it was a Friday night, so we just did what the locals do, because we were travellers, not tourists. So we headed to the beach and we put our backpacks down and we thought we'd better get rid of that last little bit of stash that we still had. We didn't want to turn up back in the UK with, anything suspicious. So rolled up a cheeky joint and smoked it on the beach, just, trying to get rid of the evidence. And literally just put it out, stubbed it out on the sand, quickly covered it over, turned around, and there were the local constabulary just doing their rounds of the beach. Slightly awkward. So they immediately made a beeline for us, because obviously we were the only foreigners on the beach, so we looked slightly conspicuous. And they came over to us and started addressing us in French. And at the time, I only had very rusty schoolgirl French. And Jim, being a Kiwi, basically just knew how to take the piss. That's all he did. So I'm trying to explain the situation in my very rusty schoolgirl French, trying to explain that, we'd checked out of the hotel, we needed to get to the airport. Would you like to see our passports and our tickets? So we handed them over. And of course the cops, immediately fell into the traditional good cop, bad cop routine. So bad cop, bit stocky, swarthy, big moustache, started going, passport, billet, show me your tickets. So, quickly showed him everything that, he wanted to see. And he started muttering about taking us to the station and kind of interrogating us, basically. Jim was basically just taking the piss out of his moustache. But anyway, good cop stepped in, started looking at my passport, and the line of inquiry changed somewhat. And he started saying, vous êtes anglaise? Oui, oui, je suis anglaise, monsieur. Votre adresse, s'il vous plaît? What is your address? And I immediately just wrote down my parents' address in the UK because, what else was I going to do? And then the killer question, vous êtes marié? Are you married? Oh, non, monsieur. Because we weren't. What else was I going to say? And anyway, we very quickly decided to get out of that situation, buried over the pile in the sand, which hadn't been noticed at that point, and departed for the airport. Sometime later, my parents forwarded me a letter from Good Cop in Morocco, inviting me to spend some time with him at his farmhouse in Fez, to meet his parents and his goats and his chickens. And I often wonder what life might have been like if I'd only accepted that invitation. But here I am. Thank you.
That would have been a real shocker for Mum and Dad. Okay, final storyteller tonight, Ciaran Durand. So the historical figure Ciaran most identifies with is Brendan Behan. Now I had to look him up. Brendan Behan was a Dublin-based poet, well known for his wise quotes. Ciaran's greatest regret is being afraid. The greatest love of his life is his wife. And he considers his greatest achievement is making it this far without meds. A mental health worker. Perfect. And our final storyteller tonight, please welcome Ciaran Durand.
Right. I'm going to take you back to the west of Ireland. It's October 2017. And I'm driving with my future wife back to work after taking lunch. So we're heading into Tuam. And Tuam it's a small market town about 20 miles from Galway City. It once was the seat of the High King of Ireland, but now it's kind of more known for the messers, the blackguards, the sketches, the shitehawks, and all the lakes merchants that live there, and also the saw doctors. So we're heading to Tuam, minding our own business. We're passing through kind of a boggish woodland called Ballinderry. It's on the R347 if you want to look it up. It's nothing major happens there. It's just an ordinary back road. But I noticed some roadkill on the side of the road. So I slow down, and it's quite obvious quite quickly what it is. It's a pine marten. And if you don't know what a pine marten is, it's a member of the musselad family, which means it's a cousin to the badger, the stoat, the ferret, and it's an in-law of the likes of the weasel, the otter, the badger, and the mink. So the reason I noticed what it was it's got a very, very distinctive, luminous yellow fur bib under its throat. So you could clearly see it was a pine marten. So first thing I do is I ring a friend of mine who actually is from that area but is now living 2 hours towards the west coast of Ireland. He's living in Mayo. So I ring him and tell him, because I know he's an interest in these things. So we're chatting and we're driving to work, and anyway, we get to work and the day goes on, and as we're travelling back out that evening, I'm sure I'm either going to be met with, a splattered pine marten on the road, but at the scene of the crime, there's nothing, no trace of anything. So I pay no heed to that. Continue on, we do our thing. We're living in Ireland for a while. We had been living here, we're gone back. And that went from our memory. We didn't really pay any heed of it. But Clem Quinn, the man I mentioned, I've known him for probably 30 years. And we formed a very strong friendship based entirely on our addiction to and love of the crack. CRAIC. not to be confused with any other sort of crack. But it has the same addictive qualities. So I would have met Clem when we were young. It would have been underage sport, playing rugby, playing Gaelic football, playing hurling, and to pass the time at training in the west of Ireland on the west coast where it rains a lot. You're at training, you have to entertain yourself. So we invariably, our paths crossed there, and we found we had a common love for this, having the crack and messing and shite talking. So that was what we did to keep ourselves occupied while we were training, and it kept us warm, but it never kept us dry. But so Clem is that friend that everyone has, and he comes from a long line, very strong stock of messers, and he's also loved by everyone that meets him. My mother, in fact, has a framed picture of Clem on the bedside locker beside the bed. That's the kind of person he is. So we move on. It's now we're March 2018. Clem is back for the weekend. He's down in his home house. I'm down there. We're down having a cup of tea, talking shite, and his father's in the sitting room. We're all in there, and Christy's sitting in the armchair. He's in front of his two favourite things. He's got a roaring turf fire, and he's got the TV on. And we're just sitting talking shite, nothing major, just seeing what's going on. There'll be a few stories. It's a great house for stories. There's always something going on. There's always some gadget being built or something being welded or cut or moved or whatever. And Christy's a bit of a character. So we're chatting, and I know Christy has an interest in these things, so of course the Pine Martin pops into my mind. So I tell him what I saw, where I saw it. I said, very distinctive, very bright, luminous bib under his neck, and I said he wasn't badly damaged. He looked pretty good for a man or for a Pine Martin that had hit a bumper, And Christy didn't take a break, didn't break eye contact, slightly shifted his head without moving his eyes, and said, "That lad's abroad in the freezer." I said, "Well, this is the only house that someone could say that to me. This is the only place." So I'm looking at Clem, we're cracking up, and Clem is just throwing his eyes to heaven, going, "Yeah, well, this, you know what to expect when you're here." So anyway, one thing leads to another. Christy. I'll tell you a quick story about Christy in between, just to paint a picture of what kind of a person he is and where Clem comes from. So 30, 40 years ago, when Christy was a young man, he lives in a rural parish like that, and a neighbour buys a new car. So the neighbour has the new car, and the neighbour is going around telling everyone, whether they want to hear it or not, how fuel efficient this new car is. He's telling them outside the pub, he's telling them outside the shop, he's telling them outside the church. Any chance he gets, whether you want to hear it or not, doesn't matter. And this starts to annoy Christy a small bit, like a small stone in his shoe. He just grates on him a bit. So as it goes, he says, "Right, I'm going to get this fella." So he removes the spare tyre well out of the back of the car and starts to one by one put rocks in there. And slowly but surely, these tales of fuel efficiency start to evaporate, and we never hear about it again. So that's the kind of Christy. He plays the long game. So that's where Clem comes from. So next thing, we're against the clock, so we keep going. We are where are we up to? We are up to 4 years later, 2022, July 22. Blink of an eye, it's gone. We're here. We've moved back to New Zealand. We're back to Ireland to get married, myself and Anya. So, of course, Clem's best man. And he's trusted with the job of getting me from his house. I stayed at his house the night before, down to Cong, which is a lovely, beautiful village in Mayo on the banks of Loch Corrib. It's where The Quiet Man was filmed. So John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara were there. So that's where we were going. He was given the job. Right, you're going to have to get me down there. Grand. We jump in the van, two quiet men into the van, head for Cong. His van is notoriously filled with shite. There's shite in his van, head to toe, always. He's got camping gear, climbing gear, running gear, swimming gear, kayaks. He's a carpenter, so he's got chop saws, bench saws, jigsaws, seesaws, everything. And we're trying to keep the suits tidy and the shoes clean. So we get to Cong. Day goes brilliant. Great day. Small family wedding. Everything's brilliant. Getting to the second part of the day, the end of the day, where all the formalities are out of the way. People are relaxing. We're having the meal, speeches. So we're standing there. Clem is telling the best man's speech. He's telling the shareable stories he can. Big smile on his face. And I'm sitting there. I'm beaming. Great day. And I see all the heads in the crowd start to turn. And they start to turn to look at the back of the room. And so I follow the eye line of sight, and I see, lo and behold, our mutual friend, the Pine Martin. And he's been beautifully taxidermied and mounted by Christy on a wooden log, and Clem has added 4 casters, and the crowd is watching this Pine Martin come up the middle of the floor as if propelled under his own steam. No one can really understand it. Mouths are open and everyone's gawping. So of course I turn to Clem. I know he's involved, and he's standing there casually, and he's just winding up some fishing line. And of course, the pine marten on the casters, mounted beautifully, hunting, makes it all the way to the top table. And only the Quins could pull off a stunt like this. Of course, the idea was my wife Anya, so she deserves a thank you. But and if you'd just give a warm welcome, and we could just introduce Clem and the pine marten. Oh, well, he promised me he'd be here, but what can you do? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ciaran. We hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. We always do. In a few weeks' time, if you go to couchstories.com, you'll be able to listen to these stories by clicking on the photographs on the website. In the meantime, please go and have a look at the website. Again, couchstories.com to see past stories, right? So just find the date, find the pictures. A lot of people don't realise this. You find the pictures, you click on the picture, and you'll hear the stories.
It's couchstories.co.nz. Okay. You know I love you. He does. Okay. We're already thinking about couch stories for 2025. The theme is epic fails. Okay? Epic fails. So have you got an epic fail? Maybe a story that you want to tell? If you do, we want to hear from you. So come up after the show, talk with me or talk with John or both of us. You can also email us through our website. You can messenger us through our Facebook page. We'd be so keen to hear from anyone wanting to tell an epic fail story next year.
Take us out, buy us a drink. What could go wrong? Now it's time for a few thank yous. Thank you for Nelson Arts Festival team at the back for making the space for us to present our 20th show tonight.
I want to say a special thank you to Nona Jackson Pinel for being our story timer and bell ringer.
A special thank you to Kirsty Cooper, quietly taking photographs here.
Yes.
And the guys from Venue Tech for their flawless work in lighting and making sound for the show this evening.
Big, huge thank you to you, our audience, and we hope you enjoyed the show. And the last and the biggest thank you goes to our storytellers. So please, everyone, the other first five, please come up on stage and we'll take a bow together. All right, so take your time, come up the stairs,